Yes, outstanding.
When I was making the pieces that resemble shelves, I had just come across this book by Lawrence Weiner called Something to Put Something On. And one character says to another character, I have something for you. And the other character says, what is it? And the other character says, it's on the table. And then the first character says, what's a table? And he says, a table is something to put something on. And I was really, really interested in this idea of something to put something on, like the kind of the semiotic of how something exists and why it exists, and what we call it. So I started kind of making something to put something on. And then the second question for me was, well, what do I put on the thing that I made to put something on? And then I think from there you start seeing me kind of using the things that were really around me, whether they were the books that I was reading, the records that I was listening to, the things I was applying to my body. And all those materials began to kind of gel together to form what I thought was like, you know, my conversation. I think there's always been this thing in my work that I've always been interested in around the domestic and around kind of hijacking things that we're familiar with and, you know, essentially kind of occupying them. And I grew up enveloped in this kind of Afrocentric conversation. We celebrated Kwanzaa, and my mother wore dashikis and had an afro. But the thing that I think is most interesting for me is that one day they just weren't wearing dashikis anymore, and there were no more afros, and we weren't celebrating Kwanzaa anymore. You know, so that transition from Afrocentrism and from this kind of interest in kind of applying an Africanness or acquiring an Africanness to your parents becoming essentially just like middle class soccer moms and what have you. Like, so that transition and that dichotomy, I think, is why humor has become so interesting for me around that conversation and around those kind of signifying materials. A lot of the work that I grew up seeing by black artists very much depicted a problem. I wanted to make something that didn't necessarily speak to a problem. So I developed a group that I called the New Negroscape Social and Athletic Club. I think some of the photographs were inspired by like the photographs of James Van Der Zee in the Harlem Renaissance. And so it became this kind of den for this secret society, and I started imagining these meetings and this discourse that would be happening with these characters in this fictional environment. I think it's very much kind of invested in the history of escapism. I always say black Americans tried to go from the south to the north. Then you have, say, Marcus Garvey, and he says, let's go back to Africa. And then you have, say, Sun Ra, and he says, don't worry about it, we're going to go to Saturn. And then, you know, I think, I always talk about a book by Paul Beatty called White Boy Shuffle, where the protagonist suggests that all black people should just kill themselves. So it's this kind of evolution of this kind of escapist practice that I think is, for me, very funny. Aaron Magruder writes a comic strip called Boondocks. He had this quote where he says, why does every black person think that they were chased by dogs and sprayed by hoses? And I think what he's trying to get to is that it's important for you to, in a lot of ways, live your own history. And if you are consistently burdened by a bigger history that may have affected your existence, but is not your specific story, then you're doing yourself a disservice. It's not fully about the predicament of history. It's about what you're able to author yourself and how you're able to form the future rather than living purely kind of in the past.